Alright everyone, the Mechanical Bloke here. I'm just going to go through this real quick. It's just going to be a recap, and then I'm going to get into the main part of the video, alright? So check it out. So for those of you that don't know, this is the Audi Q5. This is how we're going to take out the jack and where it's located. As you can see, there's the dirt rug down there and the cover that go right up in here. Alright, so you're going to take those out. Then you have this subwoofer or whatever speaker in the back, and it sits right in here. Normally it would set inside of a spare tire, but this car doesn't have one. And there's a nut that holds all that stuff down. So you take that nut off, you take the subwoofer off and the spare tire that would normally be sitting here. Alright, and when you lift this up, sorry, I'm trying to do this with one hand. You see the batteries in here, the jack sits right in here with the tools, normally sitting right in there. And there's a first aid kit that sits out here as well. Now right in this spot is where this little clip sits right in here. This is what you're going to use to take the hubcap cap off. And if I hadn't already said it earlier, I'm going to be changing the rear brake pads. This is a new video. For the front brake pads are a little different. You use this little clip to take these off, these little caps off, and then if any of these pieces are stuck, if you have a new cap, you can put that on at the end of the video, or you can just put these back on. It's not really a big deal. And some of these tires have a wheel lock nut, and there is a special box that's going to be in the same compartment that will have the lock nut in there to be able to take that lug nut out. Alright, but this one does not have it, so we're going to move right along. Now, if you look inside of your Audi's owner's manual, it will tell you the anchor points for the floor jack that is rated for this particular car. Don't use the jack for anything else, okay? This lip right here is where the jack is going to set, and that's where you're going to be lifting from. And as you can tell, where it's chewed up right there, there used to be an arrow there, and situating the jack in a specific spot still doesn't guarantee that you're going to have the clearance, so you may have to eat this cosmetic damage up, unfortunately. So I'm going to jack this car up, and always make sure, like I said in one of my previous videos, if you don't know, go check it out. Always break the torque on these lug nuts before you get it up in the air, okay? Okay, so on these you have an electric motor for the parking, or for the brake itself. So we're gonna have to take this clip off and disconnect it. And if you have a spare battery, you'd be able to compress the pistons that set up in the caliper. But since I don't, I'm gonna do it mechanically. I'm gonna do it manually. It shouldn't take me too long, but I'll show you exactly what I'm doing when I do that to be able to compress the pistons to fit the new brake pads inside of here, okay? So give me like 2 seconds. Alright, we have the disconnect for the electric motor for the brakes, and the caliper sets right in here in the caliper holder. And there's a bolt here, and there's a bolt here that we need to take out, okay? And I think they're, I don't know, 14 millimeter. But I'm going to go ahead and take those out, and then we're going to pry this caliper out, okay? Oh, I also wanted to say that I almost forgot. There is a nut that sits right here. You need to hold that nut while you loosen this bolt. Probably should have said that before. Totally forgot. Sorry about that. Hold that nut with a size 14 or 15 wrench, I believe, or a set of pliers to keep it steady, and then loosen the bolts on each of these, and you'll be able to pry this caliper out, okay? One other side note, since it's an electric motor, when you engage the parking brake, that pushes the piston up against there, because the rear brakes are the only ones that engage when you put the parking brake on. So you're going to want to leave the parking brake off for the rear brakes, and chock the front tires. I have some chocks in the front. It's holding it, just so it doesn't roll off, or just in case, you just want to cover all angles before you take the truck, or put the truck or the car or whatever into the air. All right, So I have those bolts out right here, okay, on each side of the caliper, and that allows for a little bit of free movement here. All right, so we're going to take this caliper out. I'll be right back. All right, caliper's off. All right, and brake pads are now free to take out. So you can pry on them however you want. You can just pull them out like this. On each side, they set inside these tabs right here, which you can change if they're bad. If you get the entire kit with the rotors and everything, then these tabs should come with it. But I think these tabs, I'm going to check them and just check to make sure they're good, which I think they are. It's just the brake pads themselves are completely just worn down on this. So I'm going to change those out, and we're going to compress this. We're going to compress this piston down by taking this a T27 fitting bolt right here and right here, and we're going to take the back side of this motor, and I'm going to use a C-clamp on this piston right here, a C-clamp on this piston right here once I take this back plate off, to help me compress this piston as I manually override the motor itself. Okay, so I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Alright, just for comparison, that is metal. Alright, there's no more pad on this. This was on the inside. This was on the inside pad. That's just metal. You can see the little like rivets right there that run in from the back plate. This was on the outside. This was the outside brake pad. So you can still, as you can tell, there's still some, but this will cause a grinding sound and everything. So it's probably it's definitely a good thing that we're changing this thing out right now. But yeah, gonna throw in the new brake pads and compress that piston. Alright, just for comparison, that is metal. Alright, there's no more pad on this. This was on the inside. This was on the inside pad. That's just metal. You can see the little like rivets right there that run in from the back plate. This was on the outside. This was the outside brake pad. So you can still, as you can tell, there's still some, but this will cause a grinding sound and everything. So it's probably it's definitely a good thing that we're changing this thing out right now. But yeah, gonna throw in the new brake pads and compress that piston. And when you put these pads back in, you're going to want to obviously have the metal plating, the riveted side on the outside, and the actual pad itself facing the rotor. Alright, and I mean, I'm pretty sure you could have figured that out by when you disassembled it initially, but it's always good to make sure you do that. These tabs provide, these tabs right here provide like a spring, which acts like a spring to like push the pads back out away from the rotor itself. Kind of like they're kind of like in like a rubber band. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so my dumb face it does not have a C-clamp. It's going to be big enough to be able to compress this piston, so I'm going to have to find a different way. And also, you can use a compression tool. You don't need to have a compression tool or a C-clamp. You just need to be able to fit something in there. I mean, even if you do it by hand. I'm going to use a T45. If you don't know what that looks like, it looks kind of like a... Well, actually, I already have it on the... See? I mean, you can use like any type of a big, like a flathead screwdriver, just to be able to fit in those threads in there to get some turns out of it. Because you're going to need to I think you're going to need to go counterclockwise first, and then clockwise. And that should, when you go counterclockwise, it should disengage and allow you to compress that piston. Alright, so you have to go counterclockwise on the electric motor until you feel some resistance, and then go a few turns over that. Then what I did manually, which I will never do again, I'll just get a compression tool or I will hook up a spare battery that I have, was I placed these filter remover pliers, these filter pliers, on here and on the piston itself, and I squeezed, and it took all of my strength. But once you feel that resistance, it should engage. When you go counterclockwise, it should engage. Then you put as much pressure as you can on the piston and as much leverage as you can to be able to close it, because this thing is a pain in the rear end. Alright, so once I got the piston compressed as much as I possibly could, well, actually, let me tell you, you have to go clockwise for it to compress after you've engaged the piston going counterclockwise. It sounds kind of weird, but as you're applying pressure to the piston, then you want to, either using your big flat tip screwdriver inside the gear itself, where I showed you earlier, or the T45 that I use to spin the gear, you're going to want to spin it slowly and apply as much pressure as you possibly can to that piston. This is if you're doing it manually. Alright, and it took like every ounce of strength that I had, but I finally was able to have enough clearance to be able to fit the caliper and the piston over these new brake pads. It was a pain in the nether regions, to be blunt. So I was able to fit the caliper on. You always want to line these bolts up, make sure they line up, because if you decide to put this, unless you already put this in on the back side of the electric gear motor for the brakes, then these may not line up. So make sure you line these up as best as you can, so that way you can get these bolts back in. Alright, and everything happens in reverse. So I'm going to put these in while this is on, because it's really not that big of a deal. It's easy to put these back in, but lining these bolts up is crucial to hold the caliper to the caliper holder, which in turn houses the rotor and the brake pads. Okay, and let me tighten all that up and I'll be right back. Alright folks, appreciate it. Need me to tell you to tighten down everything on the caliper and that electronic motor, and then reconnect that electrical plug. Crucial. Then reinstall the tire, and always torque in a star motion. Alright, but don't torque while it's still on the jack stand. Tighten it as much as you can, because you know that tire is going to spin. You're not going to get enough power behind on those lug nuts. So just get it enough to get it back on the ground, leave the jack stand underneath. Alright, and then torque in that star motion, and then double check by going all the way around one more time. Okay, so hope you learned something. If you didn't, I can elaborate on anything. Alright, almost forgot to tell you, be sure that you, when you're done, pump those brakes. Alright, you need to get that fluid going, you need to get those brakes going. So pump the brakes after you're done. Alright, after you put everything away and you get in the car and start it, and then test drive it. Alright, test drive it, see how it feels. Alright, that's going to be a huge indicator. Listen, make sure you don't have the radio going or anything. Make sure you have the windows down so you can listen and feel for any sort of abnormality, so that way you can address them before they become a problem later on. Okay, so peace.